Judgment. When you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. It's always better to make your opponent come to you, abandoning his own plans in the process. Lure him with fabulous gains, then attack. You hold the cards. Observance of the law. At the Congress of Vienna in 1814, the major powers of Europe gathered to carve up the remains of Napoleon's fallen empire. The city was full of gaiety, and the balls were the most splendid in memory. Hovering over the processing, however, was the sad of Napoleon himself. Instead of being excluded or exiled far away, he had been sent to the island of Elba, not far from the coast of Italy. Even imprisoned on an island, a man as bold as creative as Napoleon Bonaparte made everyone nervous. The Austrians plotted to kill him on Elba, but decided it was too risky. Alexander I, Russia's temperamental Caesar, heightened the anxiety by throwing a fit during the Congress when a part of Poland was denied him. Be aware, I shall lose the monster, he threatened. Everyone knew he meant Napoleon. Of all the statesmen gathered in Vienna, only Talleyrand, Napoleon's foreign minister, seemed calm and unconcerned. It was as if he knew nothing the other did not. Meanwhile, on the island of Elba, Napoleon's life was a mockery of his previous glory. As Elba's king, he had been allowed to form a court. There was a cook, a wardrobe mistress, an official pianist, and a handful of courtiers. All this was designed to humiliate Napoleon, and it seemed to work. That winter, however, there occurred a series of events so strange and dramatic they might have been scripted in a play. Elba was surrounded by British ships, their cannons covering all possible exit points, yet somehow in a broad daylight on 26 February 1850, a ship with 900 men on board picked up Napoleon and put to sea. The English gave chase, but the ship got away. This almost impossible escape astonished the public throughout Europe and terrified the statesmen at the Congress of Vienna. Although it would have been safer to leave Europe, Napoleon not only chose to return to France, he raised the odds by marching on Paris with a tiny army in hopes of recapturing the throne. His strategy worked. People of all classes threw themselves at his feet. An army under Marshal Ney sped from Paris to arrest him, but when the soldiers saw their beloved former leader, they changed sides. Napoleon was declared emperor again. Volunteers swelled the ranks of his new army. Delirium swept the country. In Paris, crowd went wild. The king who had replaced Napoleon fled the country. For the next 100 years, Napoleon ruled France. Soon, however, the giddiness subsided. France was bankrupt, its resources nearly exhausted, and there was little Napoleon could do about this. At the Battle of Waterloo in June of that year, he was finally defeated for good. This time his enemies had learned their lessons. They exiled him to the barren island of St. Helena off the coast of Africa. There he had no more hopes of escape. Interpretation. Only years later did the facts of Napoleon's dramatic escape from Elba come to light. Before he decided to attempt his bold move, visitors to his court had told him that he was more popular in France than ever, and that the country would embrace him again. One of these visitors was Austria's General Collor, who convinced Napoleon that if he escaped, the European power, England included. Napoleon was tipped off that the English would let him go, and indeed his escape occurred in the middle of the afternoon full of England's spy glasses. What Napoleon did not know was there was a man behind it all, pulling the strings, and that this man was his foreign minister, Talleyrand, and Talleyrand was doing all this not to bring back the glory days, but to crush Napoleon once and for all. Considering the emperor's ambition, unsettling to Europe's stability, he had turned against him long ago. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba, Talleyrand had protested Napoleon should be sent farther away, be argued, or Europe would never have peace, but no one listened. Instead of pushing his opinion, Talleyrand bided his time, working quietly. He eventually won over Casterat and Metternich, the foreign minister of England and Austria. Together, this man baited Napoleon into escaping. Even Collor's visit to whisper the promise of glory in the exiles here was part of the plan. Like a master card player, Talleyrand figured everything out in advance. He knew Napoleon would fall into the trap he had set. He also foresaw that Napoleon would lead the country into war, which, given France's weakened condition, could only last a few months. One diplomat in Vienna, who understood that Talleyrand was behind it all, said he has set the house ablaze in order to save it from the plague. When I have laid bait for deer, I don't shoot at the first door that comes to sniff, but wait until the whole herd has gathered around. Otto von Bismarck, 1815-1899. Keys to power. How many times has this scenario played itself out in history? An aggressive leader initiates a series of bold moves that begins by bringing him much power. Slowly, however, his power reaches a peak, and soon everything turns against him. His numerous enemies band together trying to maintain his power. He exhausts himself going in this direction and that, and inevitably he collapses. The reason for this pattern is that the aggressive person is rarely in full control. He cannot see more than a couple of moves ahead, cannot see the consequences of his bold move or that one, because he is constantly being forced to react to the moves of his ever-growing host of enemies and to the unforeseen consequences of his own rash reactions. His aggressive energy is turned against him. In the realm of power, you must ask yourself, what is the point of chasing here and there, trying to solve problems and defeat my enemies if I never feel in control? Why am I always have to react to events instead of directing them? The answer is simple. Your idea of power is wrong. You have mistaken aggressive actions for effective action, and most often the most effective action is to step back, keep calm, and let others be frustrated by the trap you lay for them, playing for long-term power rather than quick victory. Remember, the essence of power is the ability to keep the initiative, to get others to react to your moves, to keep your opponent and those around you on the defensive. When you make others people come to you, you suddenly become the one controlling the situation and the one who has control. Control has power. Two things must happen to place you in this position. You yourself must learn to master emotions and never be influenced by anger. Meanwhile, however, you must play on people's natural tendency to react angrily. When pushed and baited in the long run, the ability to make others come to you is weapon far more powerful than any tool of aggression. Study how Talleyrand, the master of the art, performed this delicate trick. First, he overcame the urge to try to convince his fellow statesmen that they needed to banish Napoleon far away. It's only natural to want to persuade people of pleading your case, imposing your... And even had Napoleon been able to overcome these difficulties, the likelihood of his success would have been greater, were he able to choose his time and place of action by setting the proper trap. Talleyrand took the time and place into his own hands. All of us have only so much energy, and there is a moment when our energies are at their peak. When you make the other person come to you, he wears himself out, wasting his energy on this trip. In the year 1905, Russia and Japan were at war. The Japanese had only recently begun to modernize their warships so that the Russians had a stronger navy, but by spreading false information on the Japanese Marshal Togo Heihachiro baited the Russians into leaving their docks in the Baltic Sea, making them believe they could wipe out the Japanese fleet in one swift attack. The Russian fleet could not reach Japan by the quickest route through the Strait of Gibraltar and then the Suez Canal into the Indian Ocean. Because these were controlled by the British and Japan was ally of Great Britain, they had to go around the Cape of Good Hope and the southern tip of Africa, adding over more than 6,000 miles to the voyage. Once the fleet passed the Cape, the Japanese spread another false story. They were sailing to launch a counterattack, so the Russians made the entire journey to Japan on combat alert. By the time they arrived there, seamen were tense, exhausted, and overworked, while the Japanese had been waiting at their ease. Despite the arts and their lack of experience in modern naval warfare, the Japanese crushed the Russians. One added benefit of making the opponent come to you, as the Japanese discovered with the Russians, is that it forces him to operate in your territory. Being on hostile ground will make him nervous, and often he will rush his actions and make mistakes. For negotiations or meetings, it's always wise to lure others into your territory or the territory of your choice. You have your bearing, while they see nothing familiar and are subtly placed on the defensive. Manipulation is a dangerous game. Once someone suspects he is being manipulated, it becomes harder and harder to control him. But when you make your opponent come to you, you create the illusion that he is controlling the situation. He does not feel the strings that pulls him. Just as Napoleon imagined that he himself was the master of his daring escape and return to power. Everything depends on the sweetness of your bid. If your trap is attractive enough, the turbulence of your enemy's emotions and desires will blind them to reality. The greater they become, the more they can be led around. The great 19th century robber baron Daniel Drew was a master at playing the stock market. When he wanted a particular stock to be bought or sold, driving prices up or down, he barely resorted to a direct approach. One of his tricks was to hurry through an exclusive club near Wall Street, obviously on his way to stock exchange, and to pull out his customary red bandana to wipe his perspiring brow. A slip of paper would fall from his bandana that he would pretend not to notice. The club's members were always trying to foresee Drew's moves, and they would pounce on the paper, which invariably seemed to contain an inside tip on a stock. Word would spread, and members would buy or sell stock in droves, playing perfectly to Drew's hands. If you can get others to dig their own graves, why sweat yourself? Pickpockets work this to perfection. The key to picking a pocket is ply their trade in knowing which pocket contains the wallet. Experienced pickpockets often ply their trade in train stations and other places where there is a clearly marked sign reading be aware of. Pickpockets, passersby seeing the sign invariably fix their wallets to make sure it is still there. For the watching pickpockets, this is like soothing fish in a barrel. Pickpockets have been have even been known to place their own beware of pickpocket signs to ensure their success. When you're making people come to you, it's sometimes better to let them know you are forcing their hands. You give up deception for overt manipulation. The psychological ramifications are profound. The person who makes others come to him appears powerful and demands respect. Filippo Brunelleschi, the great Renaissance artist and architect, was a great practitioner of the art of making others come to him as a sign of his power. On one occasion, he had been engaged to repair the dome of the Santa Marla del Foria Cathedral in Florence. The commission was important and prestigious, but when the city officials hired a second man, Lorenzo Ghiberti, to work with Brunelleschi, the great artist brooded in secret. He knew that Ghiberti had gotten the job through his connection and that he would do none of the work and get half the credit. At a critical moment of the construction, then Brunelleschi suddenly developed a mysterious illness. He had to stop work, but pointed out to city officials they had hired Ghiberti, who should have been able to continue the work on his own. Soon it became clear that Ghiberti was useless, and the officials come begging to Brunelleschi. He ignored them, insisting that Ghiberti should finish the project. And finally they realized the problem. They fired Ghiberti. By some miracle, Brunelleschi recovered within days. He did not have to throw a tantrum or make a fool of himself. He simply practiced the art of making others come to him. If on one occasion you make it a point of dignity that others must come to you and you succeed, they will continue to do so even after you stop trying. Image: the honey-eyed bear trap. The bear hunter does not chase his prey. A bear that knows it is hunted is nearly impossible to catch and is ferocious if concerned. Instead, the hunter lays traps baited with honey. He does not exhaust himself and risk his life in pursuit. He bears then waits. Authority. Good warriors make others come to them and do not go to others. This is the principle of emptiness and fullness of others and self. When you induce opponents to come to you, then their force is always empty. As long as you do not go to them, your force is always full. Attacking emptiness with fullness is like throwing stone on axe. Zhang Zhu, 11th century commentator on the art of war. Reversal. Although it's generally the wiser policy to make others exhaust themselves chasing you, there are opposite cases where striking strongly and aggressively at the enemy so demoralizes him at this energizes him. Instead of making others come to you, go to them. Force these to take the lead. First attack can be awesome weapon, for it forces the other person to react without the time to think or plan. With no time to think, people make error of judgment and are thrown on the defensive. This tactic is a verse of waiting and baiting, but it serves the same function. You make your enemy respond to your terms. Men like Caesar Borgia and Napoleon used the elements of speed in intimidate and control. A rapid and unforeseen move is terrifying and demoralizing. You must choose your tactics depending on the situation. If you have time on your side and know that you and your enemies are at least at equal strength, then deplete their strength by making them come to you. If time is against you, your enemies are weaker, and waiting will only give them the chance to recover. Give them no such chance. Strike quickly and then they have nowhere to go. As the boxer Joe Louis put it, he can run but he can't hide. He can run, he can hide. Okay, bye.